So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone here. Thank you very much for joining in this webinar today, Shaping the Future of Humanitarian Action, Trends, Innovations, and Anticipatory Response. And this will be our remote day. So tomorrow and on Thursday, we will also be having an event at the Hotel Dan Carlton. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, those who are helping us organize and fund the event, ECHO, through the Evidem Consortium project, which is led by Sitong, who will be with us shortly on the next panel, and also NASA Lifelines, which we are working with as well. So thanks to both of them. Thanks to all of you for attending. First of all, to introduce you a bit to Three Eyes, what is our idea? Why are we hosting this event? What is the purpose? So, as you know, may or may not know, Three Eyes formerly was IMAP France. We're based in Marseille. We work in information management, and our focus has become very much a question of innovation and technology. So how can we bring the best in new technologies, use it for a purpose, for humanitarian purposes, and really improve the way that people's lives are improved or saved? So there's a lot of focus on life saving, a lot of questions as well about technology at this juncture in time. I could say that myself, most of the people that work here, we're optimists. It doesn't mean that we don't think that there are major caveats, major dangers to technology, but it does mean that we think that they can be solved and that the net effect of technology in our future, and specifically in our area of work, will be positive. So this is sort of the philosophy we bring. At the same time, we want to look where our failures are. So this is why we collaborated with Fuck Up Nights, which is sort of a methodology to look at failures and what the impact of those failures can be on our experiences and how we can learn from them, particularly, which is very important. So in Three Eyes, we have three major areas. We want to distinguish ourselves from many information management organizations. Formerly, you could say we just presented ourselves as an organization which worked in information management services. We supported OCHA, sometimes we supported other organizations and other times. We are very focused on three major areas. One is localization. So we want to empower local organizations and particularly work in community engagement and bringing tools that can make that possible. So one of our ideas is, and it's not original, but I think we're very focused on achieving things in this area, is using AI, social media, to really scale our ability to connect with communities throughout a country, throughout a region. And so this is really undergirded many of our recent projects, which we've successfully funded. Another is remote data collection technology. How can we collect data in a very cost-efficient manner so as to be able to deliver information with representative samples that it really allows decision makers to come to conclusions with reliable information? That's another area as well. And so we're very focused on both of those different areas. And in general, we're trying to see how we can use technology to improve people's lives. So we're very happy to bring today and the next few days an outstanding group of speakers. They bring a lot of expertise across these different areas I mentioned. It includes advancing the entire humanitarian data ecosystem to data platforms, access, how can we use technology to improve decision making, cutting edge work on AI, data, and climate informed anticipatory action, and strengthening risk analysis, financing, and the construction of evidence for a more effective humanitarian response. So the collective experience, I think, of these thinkers and doers reflect the kind of interdisciplinary thinking and collaboration that this moment in time demands. So these perspectives can help us understand where the humanitarian sector is heading but also we can see how innovation can be people-centered, locally driven, and impact-oriented, which is a challenge. Which I've been in many with many private sector companies, and it's very clear. Lots of times there's a focus on profit, but there is the ability, I'm convinced, to really improve people's lives as well. It depends how we focus. So thank you again for being part of this conversation, and I think everyone here has some commitment to trying to create an improved humanitarian system. So let's start. We have 3 speakers on our first panel. I think we have, yeah, here we go. The 3 speakers on our first panel. I will be a moderator in this panel. The first speaker will be Javier Terán. Javier has been working as a statistician for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, and he's a longtime standing member of the Humanitarian Data Exchange Team, the Center for Humanitarian Data. So HDX has the objective to make humanitarian data easy to find and easy to use for analysis. He has a focus on humanitarian data systems, information management, and data accessibility. He brings extensive UN experience since 2001, including roles in the UN Statistics Division, UN ODC, and the UN Department of Field Support. And he is experienced in both data analytics and modeling, including satellite-based assessments, crime statistics, and business intelligence for UN operations. Welcome, Javier. Thank you very much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me share my screen. I have some slides just to guide the discussion. So please let me know if it works. Share. If you could confirm that you can see my slides, Jeff.
Yes, correct. We can all see them.
Perfect. Excellent. So thank you, Jeff, Andres, Diana, and the whole entire team for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, especially together with Manu and Anje. I know them very well, so it's my honor to be here sharing the stage. I wish I will be there in Bogota for the 3 days. I have seen the program looks very ambitious and very interesting, but due to other commitments, I have to join remotely, but could be next time. I will use my time to share some insights on trends, on data trends, on innovation, but also on the work on anticipatory response that the Center for Humanitarian Data in OCHA is doing with you. And towards the end of my presentation, I will bring some data stories that kind of like a help to present what you were referring before, Jeffrey. What are we doing all this? What is all this innovation? What is all this work on data we are doing? And we shouldn't forget that we in our sector, we want to serve the most vulnerable population. So before I go into trends, I just want to give you a bit of a little bit about us. So in case you are unfamiliar with us, so our mission, the center mission, is very simple, but not easy, and is to increase the use and impact of data in humanitarian response. We always hear a lot of data is coming, a lot of data is being produced, but it's certain that very little of that information is really used in an impactful way. The center is focusing on 4 areas. And we are focused on those 4 areas specifically for that, to increase that use and to increase that impact in the sector. So first, we are making humanitarian data easy to find and use through our open platform, the Humanitarian Data Exchange, or XDX in short. Second, we are promoting the safe, ethical, and effective management of personal and non-personal sensitive data in humanitarian operations. And we're trying to do that through a lot of guidance on data responsibility. Third, another work stream is to provide advanced data analysis to anticipate the impact of predictable shocks. And we're trying to do that in areas such as climate risk, but also in food security. The center is also supporting the sector, but also OCHA offices in different ways to ensure that our colleagues, especially in information management, but also heads of office, can benefit from what is analytically possible. So we are supporting country offices to access and integrate climate data, which is very important for decision making. We are supporting multiple HNOs and HRPs, country offices with risk analysis, with scenario developments, and as well as people in need projections that, as you know, is very important for the planning every year. We are also working with regional offices and regional organizations to establish thresholds for targeted supported packages based on food security and drought indicators, if you want. And finally, we are also supporting the Central Emergency Response Fund in standardizing food security data and automating trend analysis for underfunded emergencies. Last but not least, we are also supporting the community because we realize that our community sometimes lack of the confidence and the capacity to use data in an effective way. Let me jump into trends. Our foundational innovation has been XDX. It was created to solve that major problem that we had always seen it, a fragmented data landscape. You know, data scattered all over the place, data shared by emails, data found on different data portals, very often duplicated, very often lacking metadata, very often with unclear sources, and with a very doubtful quality. So since 2014, XDX has been the central platform for humanitarian data. Just the statistic from last year, XDX has been used for over 5 million unique users, and our base keeps growing every year. So in the slide, you can see our trend of users that has been growing year after year, and those spikes that you see on the chart are due to key moments that we have been facing on the sector. So in 2015, the earthquake in Nepal, 2017, 16, the big floods in Pakistan, a lot of hurricanes that we have been following and providing data for humanitarian response for the last 10 years, but also the COVID pandemic that was also a break in our trend in 2020, the war in Ukraine, the conflict in Gaza, and lately the conflict in the Middle East. All these are reflecting on our trend of users coming to XDX looking for actionable data. Every year we publish a report. Our flagship report is called the State of the Open Humanitarian Data. This report basically is an analysis of the data gaps that we identify using XDX as a proxy for data availability. But also we do a review of what is the robustness of the humanitarian data, what are the current trends, and from last year, what has been the impact of funding cuts in the sector. We look into different data sets, and data can be included on this project, on this analysis, if it's relevant to humanitarian response, if it's operational, meaning that it's at the subnational level, it's accessible with in a machine-readable format, has a broad geographic coverage. And based on that, we do an assessment. If the data follows these standards, we say it's available, but then we assess the timelines. We check whether the data is up to date or not up to date. That is very important for our sector. Data which is not fresh, data that is not reflecting the current reality, it has very little usage. So we do that analysis. And in last year, we look into 22 countries. We look into 20 countries and 20 different categories. Those 22 countries are usually HRP countries that they have a humanitarian crisis. And at the moment, we are including Colombia and Venezuela. In Latin America, in Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, DRC, you name it, many more. But also in the Pacific, we are following the countries. And the 20 categories that we are looking at vary from baseline population, mostly data from UNFPA, to IDPs and returnees from IOM, refugees from UNHCR, our typical 3W from OCHA, as well as financial data from OCHA, but there is also data on conflict events from ACLED, data on infrastructure from HOTOSM. What we have found is that the last year, in 2025, half of those subcategories show a decline in the availability and freshness. The sharpest declines were found on UNFPA data on baseline population, but also on boundaries and in administrative divisions. The only two categories where we observed a bit of an increase was on food security. That's due to the work on IPC and the regional group in Africa related to IPC, and on humanitarian, and it's the work that OCHA works the numbers to put the number of people affected. Apart from that, we've seen a lot of decreases on availability and freshness in the other categories. In general, what we have observed based on 2025 is that approximately 68% of the crisis, that is the MVP of the crisis data that we need to operate, is available and up to date across the 22 humanitarian operations. That means countries. And this is a decrease from previous years. We have been observing an increase year after year since 2020, 21, 22, but in 2025, we have seen this decrease. And what we have been learning is that even though it's a marginal decrease, that is the output of short-term mitigation measures. So organizations somehow mitigate the impact of these funding resources by freezing vacancies, by delaying layoff of personnel, by trying to do more with less in 2025, and that helped 2025 to come with good numbers on the availability of data. However, we have been talking to other partners, to other organizations, and they are telling us that the big impact, the most significant impacts are yet to be seen in this year. And this is because, these organizations are adapting to the new reality, new way of working, and they're expecting big impacts on availability of the data. There are other areas where we have seen the data comes available, but it's coming too late to be published, and that can be attributed to kind of a process slowdown. So in many organizations rely on third-party support to produce, to curate the data, to push them to the platform, to do analysis with them, and that has been causing an effect on the timeliness of the data. On the other hand, primary data collection continue in many countries, but what we have learned is that primary data collection has been reprioritized to the most severe crisis. So in areas, in countries where the primary data collection was extended to the whole country, now they have been just following the hot spots, wherever was the most significant crisis. And as you can imagine already, that's going to cause an impact. We will be blind to emerging hotspots where things may be happening, but there is no data collection, so we have to be cautious about that. Also, we heard that maybe less verification on this data collection, so less ground truth, less numbers of enumerators, and at the end of the day, this has some impact on the quality. I want to move now into trends on AI. And although our report assesses the availability of data, we also want to understand how the data is used. And we use XDX as a proxy. Over the last year, we have seen the rise of AI bots that has created kind of challenges for us to understand who is really using our data. Is it a machine or is it a person behind our platform? Probably you know this data, but the internet traffic grew by 19% in 2025, but AI bots and crawler traffic has almost quadrupled, so 4 times bigger than previous year. And according to web analysts, we have heard that this spikes was primarily fueled by the rollout of large language models from the giants tech like OpenAI, ChatGPT, of Claude, or Gemini. And that's really affecting us the way we see how data is being used. So we found also that the impact of these bots activity is not distributed equally across everybody. So for the first time in many years, civil society and nonprofits has surpassed financial institutions as the most targeted sectors for cyber attacks. And it appears that all those organizations categorized as under people and society, and of course that includes humanitarian organizations, suffer from this bot activity. And as you know, the machine learning algorithms are only as effective as the data they are trained on. So in a digital landscape that is increasingly saturated by low value information and synthetic data, created humanitarian data represents a goldmine for these LL training and retraining machines. So platforms like XDX have become a primary target for aggressive AI crawlers seeking for this high fidelity information. So we just want to understand how all these web traffic and AI bots are playing out there, because at the end of the day, we would like that that AI platforms also rely on humanitarian data in an accurately way, rather than contributing to the misinformation that may be out there. I see I have 2 more minutes, hopefully. So I just want to finish my presentation with 2 data stories, Jeffrey, if you allow me, that really represent what is the purpose of all the work that we are doing. And the first data story that I want to share with you is about our partnership that we have with Meta, Data for Good, and the use of high resolution population density maps, which are powered by AI and a combination with satellite imagery, and how organizations are using the data on XDX. So as you probably know, country population data is the denominator, is the basic for every starting point for humanitarian response. And to know exactly who is doing what where, what are the needs, where are they located, we need to have a very strong population data set. Very often, this information is lacking updateness, is not accessible. The last census in many countries is not only 10 years ago, but even 20, 30 years ago. And this data needs to be available. So World Vision and WHO needed this data in order to successfully deploy the programs, installing new water system and vaccinating children against polio. A few years ago, the center partnered with Meta Data for Good to make those data sets available on XDX. So since then, those high resolution population density maps have been available on XDX, and those are data sets where you have a 30-meter grid resolution where you have all the demographics. WHO and World Vision use this data to identify unidentified population. And they were able to reach more than 5,000 children in the Republic of the Congo with the first dose of polio vaccine. And since 2021, World Vision has reached people with clean water in dozens of locations worldwide. The second example, very quickly, is how an organization in East Africa has been using XDX to empower women about food prices. So probably there's a statistics that you also are aware, about 2/3 of women in East Africa trade staple foods to support their livelihoods. These women power the local economies, but they have lack access to they lack access to information. Farmers and traders have been negotiating food prices using data that come from XDX, and they have increased the monthly profit by 17%. And just another story just to say that how this partnership between local organizations and XDX demonstrate what is possible when data is openly available and serves people to inform, to empower them, and to change lives. And with this, I stop and I get the floor back to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Javier, for that presentation. Very interesting to see the changes in the use of HDX and the availability of data. We'll have more discussion on that in a few minutes with the panel. And so please send your questions to our team so that we have them if you're in the audience. Our next panelist is Angie Lehman. She is a fund manager at the Complex Risk Analytics Fund, CRAFT, which is based in New York. She is focused on humanitarian financing, risk analysis, and vulnerability assessment in crisis settings. She has led work in the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs on SURF publications, data analysis, and key frameworks like CIRV and life-saving criteria. She brings experience supporting humanitarian program design, monitoring, and high-level stakeholder engagement. Her previous experience with Oxfam and GIZ are focused on governance, conflict-sensitive resource management, and sustainability initiatives. Thank you very much for joining us, Angie, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It's great pleasure to be on this panel. I just sent a request to share my screen, and here we go. Let me know if you can see my screen.
No, not yet.
Not coming up yet.
No. You click on the share button.
Yeah, I also, here we go. Now you should be able to see my screen. Again, pleasure to be on this panel, and I'm really sad that I can't be with you in Colombia. We have already heard a lot about sort of innovation, AI, and you probably will be hearing more about that over the coming days. I want to take a closer look on what's underneath that all, sort of a structural issue that we really deal with in CRAFT, the Complex Risk Analytics Fund, which is the crisis data ecosystem, which we think is fragmented and underfinanced, and as a result, sort of humanitarian decisions, humanitarian data does not translate into good humanitarian decisions. And that's also one of the reasons why the humanitarian action remains often, let's say, reactive rather than anticipatory. So CRAFT really works on solving that strategic problem through multilateral financing. And in a nutshell, we are a pooled funding instrument focused on data, analytics, and infrastructure that underpins humanitarian assistance. So essentially, the foundations of how decisions are being made. And just one further. Oops. And one way to think about this is that humanitarian action depends on what we call a navigation system. So something that tells us where needs are greatest, where risks are emerging, and where resources should go. And we see that this system is highly fragmented. There's insufficient coordination, there's a lack of standards, there's poor data quality, and Javier just spoke to that. There's also a lack of new technologies to sort of enhance what's already there. And overall, there's a weak link to decision making. You can see a survey or results of a survey that we ran 2 years ago across 100 organizations, including in the humanitarian sector. And sort of what emerged for us is that basically we have still thinking in that metaphor of the navigation system, is that we have many maps, many signals, many tools, but they're not connected into like a coherent picture. And our focus is really about how can we help build a navigation system that actually guides humanitarian decisions, that helps organizations to reach people earlier, faster, and in a more targeted and dignified way. And that really brings us to the core issue, or what we think is the core issue, and that's how this navigation system is being financed. We estimate, based on studies and research and survey, that over $200 million are spent every year on the core crisis data assets. So basically the data assets, the tools, the infrastructure that everyone in the humanitarian system, and also to some extent in the peace and security system, relies on. But that funding is also spread very thinly across hundreds of projects, many organizations, without sort of a sufficient coordination or strategy. So what happens is that we have a really siloed system with a lot of duplication in some areas, gaps in others. So instead of, and coming back to our metaphor here, instead of a strong system, we get sort of partial ones. And that really limits, our ability to really move from a reactive and precise humanitarian assistance to an efficient one that's really anticipatory. So the question obviously is, okay, how do we change that? And we think it's not about, adding more tools, adding more data sets, but it's rather, transforming and strengthening, connecting what's already there into a functional ecosystem. And our approach in Craft is quite simple. We are an instrument that pools funding, aligns it with global shared priorities, and invests it strategically along those priorities. And we believe that will help us, or that already helps us, to move from fragmented investments into a shared infrastructure. So, for example, instead of funding multiple similar data sets, we would support a core data set that's with interoperable standards that really connects to other assets in the system, and that is really used by many organizations in humanitarian assistance and elsewhere. So instead of building, and I'm coming back to our metaphor, instead of building sort of separate maps, we are building a shared navigation system. And we already know that it works. In a nutshell, we have built an ecosystem, that's not just run by a single actor, but that's a collective ecosystem. So it's not a single platform, it's not a single data set, but it's really, bringing everything together in a functional system that includes, that connects basically data and insight providers with researchers, with funders, with local communities, technology partners, so that all the weaknesses that I spoke to, the fragmentation, the insufficient coordination, can collectively be tackled in an ecosystem that currently is disconnected. But we believe that through connecting the financing behind the data, we are able to basically connect the data and link it to decision making. And a proof of that is, or like we know that our model works, is that basically the data sets, tools, and infrastructure that we support shape around $12 billion in emergency funding in some shape or form, and making it earlier, faster, more targeted, and dignified. I'll leave it here. I just want to quickly point out two things for us, because now you're asking, okay, that's great. How can we be engaged? Two things I want to mention. We are currently working on an investment plan. I spoke to sort of our global strategic priorities for investments. So basically, what are the data sets, tools, infrastructure everyone relies on? And we are in the process of building or developing an investment plan. And we would very much like your input through a survey to help us identify what are these foundational building blocks and priority areas. So please, if you have time, take our survey to help us shape those priorities. And obviously, we do have upcoming funding opportunities through open calls, etc. And you can stay up to date by subscribing to our newsletter and following us on social media. I'll stop it here after this little block of advertising. Handing back over to Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Angie, for that invitation. I hope everyone can please join on scanning that QR code and answering the survey. As you said, Angie, very important work. I think that we have right now a series of requests for proposals, which maybe we can talk about on the panel, to fund the humanitarian data ecosystem, which probably need work on as far as coordination. We have to see. But thank you. And so now our next panelist will be Emanuela Doucet. Emmanuel, or Manu, as many refer to him as, is the CEO of Opal Impact and co-founder of Data Pop Alliance. Data Pop Alliance is focusing on data, technology, and AI for human development, humanitarian action, and climate resilience. Emmanuel is an adjunct professor at Columbia University, Sciences Po NSAD, and a fellow at MIT and Harvard University. He brings more than 25 years of global experience across Africa, Latin America, the Middle East and North Africa, and Asia in statistics, data science, and development. He works at the intersection of AI policy and ethics, addressing issues such as poverty, inequality, climate, migration, and governance through research, practice, and advocacy. Thank you for joining us, Emmanuel, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I've also made my presentation available as a PDF if anyone wants to have it. So I will share that, the link, later. So, okay, all right. So let me share my screen and then put it in slideshow. All right, so can you see it? Yes. Okay. All right. Well, so yeah, thank you very much. It's very nice to be with you, and some, of course, very familiar faces and names. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I will share some thoughts on the future of humanitarian action. I mean, coming last in a panel with people who are as experienced as Javier and Angie means that a lot of the key trends, requirements, directions have been mentioned. So I will try to complement them, maybe taking a bit of a like broader, like contextual and maybe like conceptual perspective, and then I will share the example of Opal Impact. So and trying to reflect on how with Opal we're actually trying to really implement and reinforce some of the principles and the priorities that I will have laid out in the first sections. So so these are the 5 sections. So I will try to cover them in fewer than 3 minutes each. First, some reflections take on the current context and constraints, again, many of which have been mentioned. Second, trying to reflect on what I think are some of the emerging and desirable key principles for the humanitarian sector, and so what has been referred to as the humanitarian reset. And then quick overview perspective on what I think are good innovations, both technological and also like social, natural, so socioeconomic, social, cultural, and natural based solutions. Still, what are the key gaps and what must change, and then a quick overview of the of Opal Impact and the Opal platform for empowering climate anticipatory action. Okay, so quickly in terms of context and constraints. So there's a lot of text. It's I didn't have a lot of time so don't focus too much. Don't worry too much about the text. That's why I want to make the PDF available so that people don't focus too much on text. But I think there are a few things recently that have come up that are interesting. Not I don't think it's very novel to the audience, but I think still worth mentioning. So the first, the notion of polycrisis, which is not very new, but I think still I think quite interesting and relevant. So this idea of multiple simultaneous crises that affect each other, and more recently, the concept of permacrisis has also emerged. So the notion that there will be a permanent state of instability and that this situation would kind of like, you know, become the new normal and erode a number of like long-standing you know, structures and systems. And I think the past few weeks have, I think, given some, you know, credit to this notion. In particular, the central role and interaction of climate and conflict risks. So you see here a number of statistics, which many of us are familiar with, but yeah, I think the fact that the number of conflicts globally is the highest since World War II, that most humanitarian crises have roots, are connected to conflicts, not all, but many, and Javier mentioned some of them, and of course to climate impact. So this is kind of like for, you know, a broad lens on the context. And indeed, they are increasingly interconnected in complex systems. So I just chose like 2 images. So they're not very easy to read, or they're very hard to read actually, but they're quite interesting. So hopefully when you get the PDF and the people can look at the source. So I think having this like mental worldview of what's happening as complex systems, where you know, every node interact with each other across different dimensions. And so these are the colors that you see on the left-hand side by UNDRR. It's a pretty recent picture graphic. So the interaction of economic shocks, environmental, political, societal, technological, and this is another on the right hand side, you know, direct impact and risks, and cascading of impact and risks across also different sectors. So I think having this kind of like, you know, complex systems view is increasingly important. And data has a role in shedding light, I think, on some of those interactions and the strengths, etc. So I'll come to that in a minute. And of course, yes, this has been mentioned. It is like critical to our field, the funding collapse. I couldn't add a graphic that I saw this morning on LinkedIn that said that the drop was actually 25% greater than was actually anticipated, even in the kind of like worst case scenario. I will have to find the source, but it seemed to be a pretty credible source. So I don't think I need to go you know, in too much level of depth or detail in terms of the numbers. So you have some examples. There are many examples, but I think what I want to stress is that there was this notions about a year plus ago that maybe this would not be, you know, so dramatic, and that so someone told me once, and that's why I'm quoting it, like, no one will die because Elon doesn't like USAID. Well, I think that's wrong. I think it was like proven that actually a lot of people did and do die and will die because Elon doesn't like USAID. That's a, you know, simplistic way of talking about the funding collapse. So it's pretty major, and I think we all realize that new financing modalities, that is not just a blip. It's something that is quite, you know, structural. So there will need to be new financing modalities, blended finance, and the likes, but it has not picked up to the level that it was before. So some key principles and the humanitarian reset, and I will, you know, speed up. So going back to this idea of the complex systems. So yeah, I think like a lot of the like notions, priorities, things that we've known for a long time come back to the surface and need to be like restated. That there is indeed no such thing as a natural disaster. It's been said over and over again for the past, I mean, as long as I've been in this field and longer. Because there's politics, and because where people are, because building codes, because vulnerability and poverty, etc. And so that makes our good old humanitarian development peace nexus even more, I think, relevant. So I'll come to that in my conclusion, that we, like the humanitarian sector, can do so much, but if there is increasing pressure, like in the trickle-down effects from the political and the conflict and the climate, then it won't be able, no matter the technology, no matter even the resources, it won't be able to fulfill its mandate. And then, of course, technology and data can help understand and affect the systems So this is in different ways. So I'll get more into when I talk about Opal also, like, quickly. So this is an interesting example. So that's a paper that I found you mentioned that I have some university affiliation. So it's a slide that I always use in my decks, in my classes, to show how with better data, better analytics, you can actually understand these complex systems. So it's a very simple way here. You only have like plus and minuses, but yeah, you can really, I think there's a lot of work being done on better understanding vulnerability, for instance. What is the effect over 3 days, 3 years, 3 decades, and so on. And I think that's an interesting field of research and innovation. So speaking of innovations, yeah, very quickly, and Javier and Jim mentioned a few. I mean, I would just mention a couple. Google Flood Hub recently. So Google published, that's pretty massive, I think, major in the space. And so when we think of flood impact, for instance, of course, GIS and geospatial analytics have expanded and improved dramatically over the past decade, 5 years, and it's improving very, very fast. So I'm going to mention also like blockchain and financial aid. We see increasingly the use of blockchain systems, of stable coins in early warning systems with pretty good results, and I would say promising results. But in red, of course, likewise, I mean, I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm not saying anything that no one knows, but and I think this will be actually one of my conclusions, because I have I think 5 or 6 minutes left, that I think with the funding cuts and the fact that technology is going to get more widespread and cheaper, there might be a rush or run to technology at the expense of other other priorities, and so that may increase some of the negative effects of technology and AI. So I'm also an optimist, Jeff, as you are. I mean, I'm trying to use technology, but I'm also well aware, as we all are, that technology can not just reflect, but reinforce biases and pre-existing inequalities, etc. And there are questions of reliability, etc. When you don't have funding to do the vetting and the checking, as Javier was mentioning, I think it expands, or it increases these types of risks. So again, don't worry about the 2,000 billion words on the slide. But I think it's important, yes, to mention not just technological innovation, but also social innovations. So innovations that may use technology, but to increase participatory inclusion, like feedback loops from communities, ground truthing, etc. Nature-based solutions also are increasingly, I think, needed. And they're like UNDRR, I think, does a good job of showing the value of nature-based solutions, so planting trees and more, and also the participatory, anticipatory action, which is, I think, becoming like a very fast-growing and maturing field. But of course, this requires structural money, and so the funding cuts in this context is quite worrisome. So I will cover this super quickly. I just have one slide here. Yeah, so I think what remains, there are still major structural gaps and challenges. The financing, weak and volatile. So yeah, we'll have to increase funding, improve coordination, also, even, I would say more than before. Localization, everyone talks about localization, inclusion, etc. But in practice, it's not done very well. It's not done very systematically. It's difficult, but sometimes I think we shy away from this challenge, and only 3% of humanitarian funding goes directly to local actors. Likewise, the notion of human or society in the loop, it's difficult to do, especially in humanitarian settings. Innovation asymmetry, that's what I mentioned, the fact that the cost of technological innovation will continue to decrease, while the cost of social innovation I think will continue to increase. So it will require a very explicit, deliberate movement towards social innovation. And that was what I said. The political imperative is that, yes, if the world continues, if climate change continues to go unabated, if wars continue to break out, etc., then then the humanitarian sector will not be able to deal with to basically fix broken legs that would come in the hospital ward every second. So I only have 1 minute left, and so I won't go over time. So we've been working on Opal Impact. So this startup, which is a spin-off of Data Pop Alliance, which focuses on empowering anticipatory climate action through these 4 modules that make the acronym OPAL, OPAL, for Observe, Plan, Act, and Learn. So I think it's self-explanatory to the extent necessary for this presentation. And we are, so we won the 2025 Mercy Corps Anticipatory Action Venture Prize. And so we are developing this pilot in Senegal, so powering anticipatory action for floods using AI and smart contracts in the region of Thiès with a number of local partners. We try to reflect, embody some of the principles and concerns that I've talked about. So you can read that more once I share the PDF. And essentially, we want to send early warnings in local languages, and so text and vocal, not just French, but also Wolof, and also small amounts of money to people who may be at risk, so in anticipation of flood. And so we're aiming to finish the pilot by June, and then scale to other regions, countries, Sierra Leone being one, for example. And I am done, and I think I'm at exactly 15 minutes. So I will share the link with this PDF in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And so that was a great presentation. Don't worry about all the text. I'm sure it'll be useful to many participants when they receive the PDF, because you have a lot of research there. So I'm going to give a very brief summary of some of the things I heard in 3 presentations that we all just heard. The first presentation with Javier was interesting to be able to see the evolution of HDX, as Javier puts it, as a foundational innovation, which brings a very important platform to the humanitarian ecosystem, which makes data available. So Javier is focused on data accessibility, and a lot of the trends he shows there focus on what kind of data is available, how many people or bots potentially are accessing the data, which is a challenge, apparently, because we have a lot of different types of access to the data, web scraping and things like this. So this is now creating a new ecosystem. So the main examples that he gives as far as the use are all focusing on the active use of humanitarian data to solve problems in humanitarian action. So the Meta and Flood Scan are 2 examples being used by World Vision and Saudi. So these are different organizations that are using some of the new tech solutions as far as data from providers. Angie Lehman is discussing a bit about the humanitarian financing of data. I thought it was very interesting to see that over 200 million spent annually on core crisis data, which is used to orient more than $12 billion of humanitarian aid. So this is a very important question as well. The surveys, I think it would be interesting for many people to read the results of the past surveys of CRAFT and get an idea at a strategic level what is happening in multilateral financing. And the idea of pooled funding for having humanitarian data infrastructure makes a lot of sense if you're going to have a coherent data ecosystem with comparable data between different countries. So this is something that we could also have a focus on in our panel right now. And finally, Manu focuses on some of the problems and solutions related to the humanitarian reset, to the challenges around building anticipatory action and the solutions which are being looked at with Opal Impact, particularly, which won a Mercy Corps Prize in 2025. Something specifically among what we should talk about, because a lot of what you talk about with Google Flood Hub, you're right, it's one of the most fantastic AI tools that's out there, and it's one we are using in 3I's as well for work here in Colombia and in Nigeria around some of the exact same things you're working on. So I think we should share information, just as an aside. The challenges of having the humanitarian, the funding cuts with the US, which had financed 75% of data collection, is interesting. I would also like to see the worst than the worst case scenario funding source to be able to understand. I think a lot of organizations are going to be proposing for funding for proposals, and it's good to have that kind of data. So we have to bring together now questions to start our panel. Let me see. I have a few things here from the audience, but I'm going to start with some of my own questions. One, I would ask, what is the role of the private sector in a lot of this work? You know, I think that I've had a lot of reflections. You mentioned Elon. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with Elon sometimes. He has, I like so many things that he does. So just a few days, no, it was 2 days ago, he wrote, Starlink has done more than any NGO to lift people out of poverty by connecting them with a means of education and a market for their goods and services via the internet. So I went and looked, I was interested, how can this be measured to give this kind of result? One thing that was cited by the AI World, by Grok, World Bank studies link broadband to 5 to 10% plus household consumption rises in Nigeria, Tanzania, GDP growth in remote regions. I think one of the questions that I have generally is, how do we fit into this crumbling humanitarian ecosystem? I don't know if this is too convoluted a question and who will want to take it, but I've worked more than 20, I was 20 years in OCHA, and I've been witness to a lot of deterioration of our setup where we had a humanitarian planning setup, which is being increasingly questioned. How do we bring in new actors? How do we bring in the private sector? What is our role as either NGOs, not-for-profits in this ecosystem to be able to save lives? How do we work together, I guess, is where I'm trying to go with this, to build an ecosystem that's sustainable, because what is going to happen to this financing setup? You know, will ECHO fill all the holes with things like the global data HIP? Or will this just create more confusion? I'm probably putting too many questions out there, but I'd like to have some general reactions and conversation. Then I'll go to more short questions.
I want us to intervene. I can
Yes.
jump with some ideas. So for the last few years, XDX has been partnering with private sector I would say in a very successful way, because also in our analysis on data gaps, private sector appear to be less affected, obviously, to these funding cuts. And they have been quite, I would say, generous, providing some data insights, especially soon after sudden onset crisis. So we have been working very closely with Microsoft Data for Good, that they soon after the floods in Libya, they provide satellite assessments of the damage. The same from Google Footprints, that soon after also some accidents in Morocco, they offer all these building footprints data available for our team, so we can do the humanitarian response. It's not easy, because you have to also understand, and you say you work in the private sector, the data is also an asset, and that can also imply some competition. So it's not easy for them to share this information broadly and publicly, but we have been able to do in some certain context. So the same with that that initiative that Manu was referring to, the Google Flood Hub. So we are in talks with them. We will put that data live and available on XDX, and that will also be part of our Signal program. The Signal program is a subscription service that we have to alert the community when there is a breaking in the trends of conflict events, flooding levels, and so on. So I would say that that is growing. That relationship with private sector is growing. It has been very scattered here and there. I wish we can have more, but it's not so straightforward. So just to share those two initiatives that we have with private sector. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Javier, for that. Yeah, I guess another follow-up would be, do any of you see the humanitarian funding ecosystem returning to the way it was before? Do you see what is the path forward? So we're looking at trends. We see a lot of troubling trends, challenges. We see some solutions with craft. Where are we going from here? Like what will be the situation with information management? Will we have enough data? Or will we find the data in another place where we just didn't think that it would be before?
Yeah, I mean, as I think we have this saying that, we used to say last in 2025, we have to do more with less. Now I think that slogan have changed. So we have to do better with less. There is no way back. That way when we used to be, I don't think it's going to come back. And part of the humanitarian reset, that's also Manu was referring to, is to really avoid, data duplication. We have to have more resilience data architectures. We have to build with what we have so far. We have to be more accountable. We have to share learning. There is no way back to the glory days, if you want. And I think the way from, at least from where we are seated, I think kind of data governance would be kind of a super important element for the way forward, because this lack of quality, a bunch of duplication, lack of interoperability, that's not going to take us that far. So we need, to do, and we are doing that. We are working on with several organizations within the UN system to understand what is our mandate, what are we supposed to collect, who has the mandate to collect data, let's say, about IDPs. And who else is doing? Why other organizations are collecting data when somebody else is mandated to do that? So we avoid duplication. We have, this principle of data minimization and protection by design. So we don't collect more things that, there are some studies that they say they're collecting more than 100 variables, and the summary only talks about 3 variables. This survey was just about A, B, and C. Hey, what happened with all the 100 questions that had been collected and cost money and created the survey fatigue in the communities? So I think it's around that the humanitarian reset is focused on, and I think that is the way forward. Over.
Thanks. Another question. I don't know, Angie or Manuel, if you'd be interested in answering this. So we have to have some more participation from other members of our panels. But one of the things that was mentioned is the dangers of duplication. Are there any benefits? Is there, in some ecosystems, you want to have redundancy and you want to be able to analyze the data that comes in? Who can be trusted? Javier mentions mandates. A lot, mandate is a very UN terminology. It's, it's an authority. It's a source of authority. It's like from God or something like this. It's like endowed upon you. So the question is like, who is the source of authority, and who should be the source of authority in determining what's good or bad data as well? So if we say we want to avoid duplication, what does that mean about the quality, minimum quality we're expecting from the data that's coming out? I don't know if any of you want to answer that, because duplication was cited as a threat. Could it also be a benefit or not?
Andy, do you want to go ahead on this question or another? I think you wanted to come in earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to speak more about sort of, the investment angle and how this can help to, let's say, break up silos, which are obviously in like the ecosystem basically is siloed. And also, keeping in mind that the 200 million that we currently invest in the core data sets, will probably decrease over time. So for us to think about how can we do, better with less, what, Javier talked about. And I think from our perspective, like of course, federated data systems are like is one the answer. And looking at it from sort of a financing perspective, we feel like like basically aligning partners around sort of shared priorities, shared core data assets, be it data sets, be it infrastructures, be it platforms. And then jointly channeling funding through those to basically strengthen and sustain them is the answer, rather than continue to support a fragmented and siloed system. And we feel like, or we think that pooled funding is a solution to that, because it brings sort of partners together around a joint priorities. It helps donors to channel their funding through a pool basically, rather than providing bilateral grants that don't add up, that are not resilient, through like a joint platform that is able to provide resilient funding, long-term funding. And we've seen this through the crisis last year. Our partners were able to go, right, because precisely we pool risks, or like we pool funding and share basically risks. And at the same time, our partners are able to continue their work, even though there are disruptions in the system. So that's really, a way to lower costs on all ends, right? Transaction costs, and at the same time providing, long-term funding that's very important to sustain the core assets in the system and really strengthen them over time. So that's sort of my 2 cents to your question on, okay, how do we deal with decreased with the current funding landscape and the decrease in funding that's available to us.
Yeah, so maybe Jeff, I'll take quickly 2 questions. I'll try to be succinct. One is the impact of funding, so or the future of funding. You're asking, like, can we imagine they will go back? So I think all of us will probably say no, it will not come back. It's it's not a blip, it's a change, structural change. And I believe it's the case. No one can, I think, tell for sure. I think there's a world where the political administrations of large countries and the economic environment and so on, like, change, and we may go back to the previous levels. And so I think it won't be the same, but yeah, so it's just to say that I think it will change. It's changing for the long run, but no one can be absolutely certain. But at any rate, I think the main point is that even if it does change or doesn't change, the blip that we're seeing right now will have long-term effects. So we all know, we've seen the study in the Lancet about the death toll projected of the USAID cuts. Like on education, on economic growth, on innovation, on health, etc., but also on data systems. So Patrick Vink at HHI wrote something recently about what happens when an NGO or an organization closes. Like, what happens to the data, for instance? So that's a risk, and it's a risk. Some of other risks that Javier mentioned about not verifying, not checking enough because you don't have the money, you don't have the time. So there are a number of risks, even if it goes back to where it was, or if you find another way. So that's just a few thoughts on funding. On the role of the private sector, and you talked about Elon, etc. I mean, of course, like no one, very few people are entirely good or entirely evil. I think you can be an evil genius. Yeah, I mean, there are also some things. I mean, it's not a therapy of Elon Musk, but I think there are some things that he's done and that he does that are objectively, genuinely very impressive. And he might be right. The citation, like, I think there's a case to be made that maybe he's right about Starlink, etc. But it doesn't negate the effects that some of his other direct or indirect actions have had on millions of people. And so I will end by saying that I think the private sector has like a major role to play, not just and we all work with the private sector. And so not just as funders, of course, as funders, we've just applied as probably hundreds of organizations to the google.org call for proposals, recently, but it's only 30 million. It's a big pot of money, but yeah, there are like, we always, and we compete, and so it's, but yeah, so there's funding, and if other large companies could do that, it would be great. There's of course also data. Google Flood Hub is another one. You mentioned Meta. I mean, we all work with these types of data sets, but I also think there are other ways, and I will stop on these few thoughts. They can take action, of course, to lower, mitigate their carbon footprints. Obvious. They can take actions, anticipatory action, to lower the impact of climate shocks on their crops and value chains and workforce and so on and so forth. They could set up research programs internally for young people to do projects, to work with NGOs. I mean, there's a lot of things that are a bit, I think, within the box or outside of the box, and a bit more like forward thinking and forward looking that could be done. And I will end here, I promise. There's also the big private sector and the very small private sector. So in Senegal, we work with a small company in Senegal called Jocalante, and they help local communities. But it's a for-profit company, and there are hundreds of thousands of those in Africa and millions around the world. And so they also, I think, need support, capital, investment, and so on and so forth. Over.
Thanks to you both for those answers. So I'm going to take one of the questions. I'm going to take two of the questions that were shared in the chat to share with you and get your reaction. One is on localization, I would say. How can we deepen the use of data and artificial intelligence with local organizations? These organizations being those that orient and make more usable its potential, and they reconfigure its use. And how do you work with them in the collection of data in regions where there's conflict, where there's armed conflict, and there can be danger there? So I guess one way one relevant point around this, because we've worked with localization a lot ourselves here in Colombia, is so there are a lot of initiatives that are more global. How is it possible to have them all participating in a useful way, a collaborative way? We mentioned a lot of competition. So our organization is competing with several others, including yours sometimes, which is good faith competition. It's good in some ways, but the question is, not a lot of organizations are incapable of even preparing a proposal for a lot of these opportunities. So how do we incorporate these local organizations and really make the data use relevant for people on the ground, and not have it become sort of a national or even international exercise around humanitarian data?
I'm happy to. Oh,
go ahead. Thank you,
yeah.
Andy.
Breaking the silence. I'm happy to speak to this question from a perspective of a funder, which we are basically as Craft. And again, I think we have sort of, through our investment process, we are able to bake in, technical principles around interoperability, data quality, etc. But we also are able to bake in, principles and standards that are around sort of, okay, collaboration between sort of data collectors, local communities, etc. And that's really sort of the power of, of pooled funding, because, by bringing certain donors together into sort of one interface, we do have leverage to really bake in those principles and make sure that the organizations that we are supporting, which obviously is not just global organizations, but if those are global organizations, we do have a lever to basically bring in those principles, which are not just on a technical level, but also on sort of on the partnerships level. And how do we really create, that ecosystem that brings together, data providers, researchers, knowledge communities, local communities, to really, build sort of a collaborative approach to data collection, data usage. So again, our approach is really through financing and connecting the dots behind it, that really gives us sort of like speaking with one voice, and really, pushing certain principles and moving the system into sort of a certain principled direction. I'll stop it here.
Thank you, Angie. Anyone else?
Yeah, if I can just elaborate a little bit
Yes.
on what Angie was saying, I think that's key. But also we have to be aware that when we collect data from communities, from groups, then this data becomes very sensitive. So on one hand, we want to help, our organization wants to help to really understand the voice of communities affected, but also just to stress that once the data is collected, especially because it comes with a lot of demographics like ethnicity, age group, professions, become very sensitive. And, you have to be aware that that data could turn around and become a weapon for to marginalize this community. So just to say, let's before engaging into this data collection, just making sure that the data hasn't been collected already, so we don't so we avoid duplication, but also that when that data is collected, all kind of like all groups should be involved. That from women, children, people with disabilities, and minorities. And there are many data standards, like the Washington Group for People with Disabilities, just 2-3 questions just to understand if we are capturing the group or not. So there are many standards that will help to maximize this effort, because every data collection has a cost, and you want to maximize the great work that, for instance, Craft is doing. We want to make sure it's not duplication, and if we are collecting, we are doing it in a responsible way. Over.
Thanks. In the audience, there's a question I think that serves as a follow-up, which asks, in context with several types of impacts, it can be climate, conflict, and very limited resources, what recommendations exist to take advantage of new technologies and build interoperable data ecosystems with clear leadership roles that avoid duplication and improve the response efficiency?
Well, I can just give my 2 cents. So, I mean, yeah, novel data sources is kind of like the heat. A lot of organizations are looking into that, especially in conflict areas. And I think here's where technology plays a very important role. We also need to protect the security of humanitarian workers. So the use of drones, the use of satellite imageries that, with time and time and time, that satellite imageries have become cheaper. I remember years ago when I was looking into that, it was a fortune to get a satellite imagery with 20-meter resolution. Now you get them all over the place. So all these technologies could help. Interoperability is a big word. It's not easy. And that requires, as I said before, a bit of data governance as well as duplication. Maybe you didn't like the mandate word, Jeffrey, but that is what kind of like is in the UN system, like who is mandated to do that. And I think that can easily translate to the NGO, the national NGO, to local NGOs, to government organizations to see who is the authority, who is the domain owner who can say, yeah, let's do this, let's do that. And after that, then interoperability may become slightly easier. But I'm telling you, interoperability has been our main task for several years on XDX. So, but we could do that. Over.
I don't know if anyone else has an additional recommendation. Also connected to this, one of the questions is, how have UN agencies and humanitarian programs approached the topic of communication around results to the community, public opinion, especially taking into account the use of technical language and that can make it more difficult to understand what we're talking about, and it can create distance with populations that are not specialized in this area.
So I can share a few thoughts. Yeah, try to be brief. So one is, I think the first question is actually a good question, and it's a good framing. So around the need and the ways to strengthen like data ecosystems. I mean, the notion of data ecosystem is not very new. We've all been swimming and in this idea for the past 15 years, 10, 15 years. But still, I think it has a lot of value, because then you talk about different stakeholders, power dynamics, the relationship. It's not just the government. It's also the private sector, local CSOs, and the press. And so maybe to tie this with the discussion about funding, I think I really believe in very strongly, deeply in collaboration, cooperation. I would say more than competition, but it's not a 0-1. But I really believe in the value of collaboration and cooperation. And so the calls for proposals, for instance, that embed. Bake in, I think was the term used. Some of those principles that you have to have a coalition, for instance. You do need to have maybe a government actor, because you don't want to replicate a system, a platform, a dashboard that already exists, but it shouldn't be just the government. So I think there are creative ways to make sure that what you're going to fund actually reflects and reinforces some of those principles of collaboration, of multi-stakeholder, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where you have innovation, impact, relevance, and all of those good things. I'll just close by saying one, two things quickly. One, there is innovative uses of technology in very constrained environments. So, for instance, and not all of which involve very high-tech technology solutions. So, but also like methodological innovations. So we've used, for instance, respondent-driven sampling in Haiti when we were working on youth and gang violence. Of course, there was no way we could send enumerators in the zones where we wanted to collect data, and so we used that methodology, which is well known. It's the snowball like sampling methodology, and it was qualitative, of course, but it's one of the low tech like powerful way in which you can go around some technology and technological and other socio-economic and cultural constraints. So I had a final point, which eludes me, but it might come back. We were talking about. Yes. The question. Yes. That was my final point. The fact that like how to communicate, and so I would focus on the question of trust, which is it's a bit of a different angle, but we see, especially in the case of early warning systems, for example, that there's a lot of either lack of knowledge or understanding, because it might be in not the language that people speak, or it's written and people might not be able to read. But there's also the very basic question of trust. And so I would just finish by giving the example of my home country. I live in Barcelona, but I'm French. And in France, when there are sometimes early warnings that tell people stay home in the case of flooding, etc., well, people usually do the opposite because they have kids and they want to pick up their kids, and so and so I think increasingly we'll see, especially with the use of AI, that there a growing distrust, or yeah, and it's also, I think, related to like to polarization, and so I think that's a pretty big risk if not only the people don't really know what data is out there, etc., but actually don't trust and act in the opposite way that the data is and the people in charge are telling them to.
Very good, thank you. So I'm going to ask one last question. We only have a few minutes left. 10 years from now, who of us are still going to exist, and what will we be doing? As organizations, not as individual human beings.
Okay, what you make me worry, Jeffrey. Well, maybe you can say I'm part of the positivist club, but I do believe that in 10 years, we're gonna change the sector to make it more data oriented, more evidence-based oriented. It's gonna be hard because as I was showing on my presentation, the use of internet and fake news and fake information is growing exponentially. But I think we are smarter than that, and we will be able to really filter what is real and true than all the noise. I see a sector a little more compact, but more focusing on a more federated data structure and really following these principles that everybody's talking about, the fair data principles, data that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So I think more and more organizations are thinking about that. We're going to move into that. There's sources. I mean, I think man is also believes on better worlds, but I think with the limited resources that we have, we have to put fair data principles more in practice, and only in that way, I think we're gonna be helping more people. So that's my take, Jeff.
Thanks, Javier. Anyone else want to give it a stab?
I can go next. So I hope in 10 years from now that obviously we still exist as a crisis data pooled funding instrument, and hope ideally that more than 50% of the 200 million for global crisis data assets are channeled through a pooled fund like CRAFT that really helps provide sustainable, resilient funding for the core assets that everyone relies on at lower cost and sort of with higher impact, and hope that this helped to strengthen and transform an ecosystem that operates along collaboration rather than competition, and that really sort of has clearly defined standards and principles that it's operating around. That would be my pitch for a future in 10 years time. Thank you.
So in 10 years, I hope I will be richer than Elon Musk and can do like even better, greater things. Probably won't happen. So yeah, no, joke aside, but well, so yeah, 10 years is a very long time. It's a very long time. Like I think if we look at back where the field was like 10 years ago, a lot has happened, and I think with the new generation of AI, agentic AI, I think that's going to have it's going to be a sea change. So I think there will be and maybe for the better, like more distribution of power and systems, but hopefully in a way where indeed you have interoperability, that there can be like flexible or agents, like basically, picking up data sources and pieces of technology, etc., that they can use and assemble to perform some tasks. And the challenge is going to be, where are humans in this system? And then at the end of the day, I think it's a cultural question. It's the question of what are the values and the principles and the norms that we collectively want to uphold, and how we instill and still nurture these values regardless of the technology of the moment.
Thank you. So I'm going to close like one of my debate moderators, John McLaughlin, would always say. He'd say, "No, you're all wrong. The correct answer is we will all be represented by AI bots." Manuel was the closest, but the correct answer is that the future will be run by AI. So we'll close the session. Thank you very much for your participation. We have a new panel coming up here with Sitong, and thanks a lot to Manuel, Angie, and Javier for your participation, as well as the audience for the questions.